We've known this for a while, but what I think the CFTC did a good job of laying out is how pervasive US persons using Binance was, even after Binance started to pretend that was untrue. And like, Binance at points in their past even recruited what they call their angels, which are volunteers who help promote Binance from US persons to interact with US people. There was internal financial reporting that showed at different times that 16 to 19% of the revenue could be attributed to the United States. For the first several years, and we knew this because we were around back then, they didn't do anything to stop US customers, right? It was just a complete free-for-all. And like, even Lim at one point said in a message in 2018, there is no fucking way in hell I am signing off as the CCO for the OFAC shit. Like, he didn't want to sign off on the corporate documents that Binance had to submit saying, yeah, we're compliant with OFAC, because he didn't think they were compliant with OFAC. And hilariously, in a very Bitfinex move that you'll recognize, Cass, in 2019, when they launched Binance US and then started making token gestures that they were actually pushing people there. And so they had a pop-up that would come up if you connected from a US IP, and you had to check a box saying, no, I'm not actually a US person. And so once you checked the box, it was a free-for-all again. For people who don't understand the Bitfinex reference, back around the same period in 2019, the block was able to register a user account on Bitfinex out of New York with the name I am New York resident. And similarly, all they had to do was check a single checkbox to self-certify that they were not from New York. So this is like a classic crypto compliance strategy, you know? And eventually they realized this was going to be a problem. Like, you get into like 2020, and on their internal documents, they told people to change their country code from US to unknown, so that when they were looking at the analysis, they wouldn't be as easily attributable to the US. And like, when trading firms would connect, there was one trading firm B, that connected from a US based IP. And so like, when Binance had to go through the show of pretending to ban them, they had one of the traders from that firm set up a personal account out of like Hong Kong, and then they ran that whole firm's trading activities through that individual's account until they could set up a new corporate entity in Jersey that was far enough dissociated that it didn't look like it had ultimate beneficial owners in the US. And then they were able to come back on Binance totally fine. Like, it was just abject failures at preventing people from the US from trading for multiple years.
I also just read, as I was going through this, that they, before we jumped on, that when they hired an auditing group for trying to be perceived as, you know, following protocols, they hired a shitty, I think that was the exact terminology they used, a shit ass or something.
Yeah.
They said something like, just some crappy fucking dumb auditor that's going to do a bad job and doesn't know what they're doing.
They literally.
do we know which auditor
so
that was?
This was one of their like cybersecurity auditors, like their compliance auditors, not their financial auditors. So I don't think we would recognize it. But you're right. Like, it says in the lawsuit, they were intentionally searching out the one they thought would be the laziest and would do the least etchy check any of this stuff. So they could say, look they gave us a report. It says we're fine.
Yeah, this is why I was drawn to that, because I was like, I think there's this running joke, you know, top 12 auditors and all of this idea of like, oh, these guys are hiring shitty auditors on purpose. And I think people think, no, they're not. They're just hiring whoever is willing to work with them. And I'm like, I don't know about that. Like, this kind of tells me that there is an actual, they're like going out of their way to hire the least competent people a lot of the time. Not to say that that's always the case, but like, I do think that it can be, as proven in this, that like, it definitely can be that they purposely hire crappy auditors and stuff.
Performative compliance. They want to like do the barest minimum to look like they're doing compliance without actually having to do it. Sorry, there's one thing that just really came into my mind that I want to make sure I don't forget. Point number 98 in the lawsuit. They talked, and I remember this from 2021. They announced that they were going to verify every single user on Binance. And I'm like, okay, I figured they were going to have to do this eventually, right? Legal and regulatory pressure was going to make this Wild West kind of go legit. And they were going to end up eventually paying some fine to the CFTC and would get to continue operating. And I figured this is like what was happening in the background back in 2021. And I'll get back to that date in a second. They announced they were going to have all their users verify their accounts. However, and that if they didn't by October 19th, 2021, they were going to be banned from the platform. They just didn't do that. They said they were going to do it, just didn't go through with it. And apparently as of February 2022, like up to 40% of their customer base was still not verified. And this is like especially wild to me because the CFTC the Binance statement that was given to Protos about this lawsuit said that they have been working with the CFTC for 2 years and that this lawsuit was very unexpected. 2 years ago would be 2021. And what did I just say? I thought when that happened, it was an attempt for them to like pretend to be compliant so they could pay some fine and make these lawsuits go away, like Bitfinex did with the CFTC back in 2015, right? But it turns out they just didn't go through with what they were supposed to do. They didn't actually do the KYC they said they were doing.
Yeah, the sheer level of I don't know what to term it. Like purposeful negligence. I don't know. It's yeah. I don't think anyone sees this CFTC lawsuit and goes, "Oh man, CFTC, bring in the hammer." That's not what's happening here. Like they're not bringing the hammer just because they're the CFTC. Like they can, like, they're not really going to hurt you. But the data that they're providing in this lawsuit is kind of terrifying because it tells me that, like, man, I just would not be surprised. This isn't to say anything's happening. And I certainly know as much as the idiot down the street. I don't know anything about anything, but like, man, this looks ripe for the Department of Justice. It just looks ripe for them.
Yes. And that's what we've really been kind of leading up towards here and leading up to, I feel like, for our last several episodes about Binance, right? And there was one kind of particularly funny line that came from Lim that kind of touched on that, where he said, let me find this. U.S. users equals CFTC equals civil case, can pay fine and settle. No KYC equals BSA Act equals criminal case, have to go to jail. And if you read through the lawsuit carefully from the CFTC here, they reference that these things might be in violation of the Bank Secrecy Act. And the Bank Secrecy Act is one of the things that ended up taking out Arthur Hayes and making him eventually go into the Department of Justice. And we know that there's been an ongoing Department of Justice investigation that the Western Washington prosecutors out of Seattle believe they have enough information to indict Binance and Changpeng Zhao on, but it's supposedly been held up by MLARS. This substantial of a civil case that feels as though it's discussing multiple things that could potentially be criminal issues makes me think that if there is an indictment coming, it may be soon. Like, this has laid out a lot of violations.